Welcome to Webinar Wednesday. We are excited you are with us. Today, Erik Wikström at RTI Group will offer a closer look at ocean templates and show how they add efficiency in X-ray quality assurance and preventative maintenance. Attendees will gain insight into the efficient use of tools in the field of X-ray QA and preventive maintenance. We would like to thank our sponsor, RTI Group. RTI Group is a world-leading developer of modalities and solutions for QA of X-ray diagnostics. The company has its headquarters in Sweden with subsidiaries in the USA and Singapore, and a global distribution network in 100 countries. The RTI Academy offers video and classroom-based product and application training, as well as customized training packages for specific skill development to improve QA procedures. For more information, please visit www.rtigroup.com. Let's give one lucky attendee the opportunity to win a Webinar Wednesday Webinerd t-shirt by telling us in what year RTI was founded. You can answer now using the questions feature on your webinar dashboard. A couple of reminders before we get started. Our next HTM mixer will be next week, October 1st and 2nd in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Visit htmmixer.com for more details on this event, as well as our December HTM mixer in Nashville, Tennessee. More exciting news. We have opened online registration for MD Expo in Tampa this November. Visit mdexposhow.com to learn more about this one-of-a-kind conference where you can network with peers, earn continuing education credits, and learn the latest technology and advances in HTM. All right, today's webinar is eligible for 1 CE credit from the ACI. You can obtain your CE certificate by completing the post-webinar survey. More details on this at the end of today's webinar. As I mentioned earlier, our speaker today is Erik Wikström of RTI Group. Erik, you may begin whenever you are ready.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. We'd like to thank MD Publishing for giving us this opportunity to make this presentation. I hope it'll be interesting for you. My name is Erik Wikström. I'm the training manager at RTI, and I'll guide you through the presentation that we have today. We'll start with a little bit of a brief introduction of RTI Group. You had some basic information from Jennifer before, but the history is that it started actually quite a long time ago. It was a result of a thesis project at the Technical University here in Gothenburg. And in 1981, that resulted in the launch of the world's first non-invasive KV meter for the market. It was called the DigiX. It was quite successful. It was the only alternative to dynalyzer type of instruments to measure KV on instruments on the market. So it was quite attractive. Over the years, we've released quite a few instrument platforms. I'll just mention a few here. It's Barracuda arrived in 2004, the first wireless QA platform. We used Bluetooth for communication, and that was the first wireless as well. 2009, we introduced a transparent detector, or quote unquote transparent, for fluoro measurements, the T20. 2010 saw the launch of the RTI Ocean software. So it's been around for more than 10 years, the Ocean software, and it's been advanced since then as well. Cobia platform was launched 2011. 2014 saw the birth of the Black Piranha, which is now our premium platform. And together with that, we launched a remake of the Ocean software, which we called Ocean 2014, which had some improvements there as well. We provide complete solutions for all X-ray modalities and facilities when it comes to the X-ray QA. Global coverage, like we heard before, we're headquarters in Sweden, in Gothenburg or Mölndal, just outside Gothenburg on the Swedish west coast. We've got a branch office in Singapore for the Asian market, and on our biggest single market in the US, we have a presence in Tuaco, New Jersey, where we have a calibration facility as well. Taking a look back in history, this is what the first non-invasive KVP meter looked like, the DigiX. Not quite as compact as we like to see them today. And the active detector part is this section right up here, was a circular detector in that at that time. Already then, you see that software was an important component in the product delivery. And in the 90s, we launched a couple of families for more standalone features. Some of you may recognize this one, which is called PMX3, which we have quite a few on the market. They still come in for calibration, even though launch was done in the mid-90s. So they're like 25 years old today. Beginning of the century, we had the Barracuda, as we saw before. It was the first one with Bluetooth connectivity between probe housing and the display unit, meaning that we could stand comfortably in a control room and receive data for that from the measurement without being hit by radiation. It was also possible to add external detectors, a selection of external detectors there for that as well. End of the 2000s, the Red Piranha was launched, which then later was replaced with the Black Piranha family, which is our mainstay product today. We also have a Cobia family, which is a single modality range of instruments with the built-in display. But since a year back, we now have Bluetooth communication with all our units, meaning that all instruments that we sell today are compatible with the Ocean software. To handle some of the measurement situations that are required, we have, of course, a selection of external probes, from external dose probes, CT probes for CTDI measurements, DAP chambers, those are product measurements, and normal ion chambers for mammo or for rad, mass probes, both invasive and non-invasive, and light probes, along with a lot of other holders and fixtures, etc., to handle the day-to-day applications. X-ray QA. Well, when we talk about X-ray QA, it might be worthwhile defining what area we're discussing in that case. And first of all, X-ray, let's look at that. Well, it's surprisingly wide, the X-ray field. It includes areas where RTI is not active, baggage scanners and non-destructive testing equipment, as well as inspection systems for verification of content in, for instance, surface-mounted electronic chips. RTI focus on diagnostic imaging, such as X-ray, CT, mammo, dental, veterinary, and chiropractor applications. There's also therapy for X-ray, and we handle the KV part, the onboard imaging systems, the low KV applications for the therapy department. So when we say diagnostic imaging, these are the areas that we refer to. When it comes to QA then, well, QA, or quality assurance or quality assessment, is a wide term, so we might want to have a look there. Generally, QA in diagnostics, diagnostic radiology aims at ensuring that equipment performs so that it can provide images of sufficient quality, so that accurate diagnostics can be made by a radiologist while minimizing the radiation risk to patient and staff. Many times the limits and performance parameters are defined by authorities. To some extent, QA also includes preventive maintenance, but in that field they may have other requirements, which in that case are determined by the X-ray manufacturer, of course. There could be other reasons for X-ray QA, such as a desire to follow industry standards, to be competitive in your industry, in your field. a benchmark opportunity with national or international guidelines, or simply following company quality policies. An important part of these fields is the testing that is performed. In diagnostic radiology, there are a number of such tests, such as KV accuracy, dose reproducibility, linearity of dose mass, and the congruence of light field and collimator light field, and beam quality, or HVL, half value layer measurements and determinations. So having defined that, I would like to put that also into a bigger picture and look at where QA for X-ray may be headed, since it's a part of the healthcare industry. First, we have one trend in the industry. Globally, life expectancy is increasing and population is growing older, but they also stay active longer in that case. So as a picture you see, you find 75-year-old bodybuilders and 102-year-old people climbing rocks and mountaineering. So all these things increase the need for diagnostic imaging. This is, of course, a driving factor in healthcare cost. And as you can see on these graphs, they've been growing steadily for many years, and there's little doubt that this will continue. Secondly, with growing economic strength in developing countries, where they will need to provide improved healthcare to its population. We see developing countries slowly moving toward expenditure levels of the Western world, and the potential is enormous. If we look at Kenya, for instance, East Africa, they have 43 million inhabitants, but only 200 radiologists. That can be compared to 126 radiologists only at Mass General in Boston. This puts things in perspective when it comes to the potential for diagnostic imaging worldwide. Thirdly, as the use of X-ray increases, so does the concern about the risks involved. Looking at the number of CT scans, for instance, we can see that it grows, so that the exposition to X-ray increases quite dramatically. And since there is a defined risk of linking X-ray to cancer, regulation is being tightened. And here we see an example of what is happening in the US market. For instance, looking at the numbers from early 60s till just a number of years ago, we see that the number of pages for regulation has grown by a factor of 10. So yeah, it's the regulation is tightening as well. Then we've got the financial side, where we see the introduction of more and more expensive equipment, which require substantial maintenance as well, since they're quite complex. That puts the focus on uptime, to increasing uptime so that revenue can be generated in those machines. Having downtime does not generate is just a cost, and that needs to be limited in all cases. And we also see squeezed budget. Prices of the equipment goes up there, and thereby budgets are being tightened as well. So that puts a squeeze also on the X-ray QA side of things. So what does that mean for us in the X-ray quality assessment field? Well, we define now that we have a good opportunity. It's a growing X-ray market. Since that market grows, so does the opportunity for X-ray QA, since that scales with the installed base of X-ray systems. We're seeing more and more effective examination techniques favoring diagnostic radiology. CT, for instance, is coming up as quite effective ones with lower dosages to patients. The field of application widens. There's a growing share. The diagnostic X-ray systems are getting more and more complex, so they require more advanced calibration and configuration. So that puts also a requirement on high performance X-ray QA equipment. And there's a growing awareness of the need for safety and high performance of X-ray equipment. So that's what we're facing. And the changes there, well, we see an increased use and thereby also an increased risk for exposure to staff and patients. That's why we need to perform X-ray QA. That needs to be in place, so that's a positive. The more regulations require new X-ray procedures also for X-ray. And that means that we need to be flexible in our approach to that market. And increased efficiency demands also land on quality assurance. So we need to reduce downtime. And thereby we need to have fewer steps, automate the procedure more, and there's also then in the regulation part of things improved or increased demand for traceability of the tests being performed. So in face of that reality, how do RTI think? Well, we believe quality assurance is a process that can be improved to be more productive by combining right instruments, hardware, accessories, and also software solutions into a holistic and customized solution for each situation. So it's the process, we're looking at a process more than supplying hardware. Our solutions help customers meet regulations and standards while giving them opportunity to excel both in productivity and accuracy, as well as traceability, and of course in that case. So that's the approach that we're looking at. So how does that come into play when we look at the Ocean software? Well, Ocean software is quite flexible, as we'll see, and with that we can build solutions with that in mind. So how can then Ocean software improve a workflow? Well, we'll look at a simple example. Look at dose reproducibility. Let's look at it from a traditional method, and with traditional I mean what has been standard or quite common, I would say, for many years. That's using pen, paper, calculator, and maybe Excel. We'll compare that with the usage of an Ocean template, just to see if we can trace any improvements or differences there. We'll then take a further step and look at analyses, built-in analyses, which we can find in the Ocean software, how they can be used. We can combine templates to provide analyses, and we'll see how they impact the efficiency. That kind of combination, that kind of new way of looking at templates, we can build those into a library of templates, combining, sharing templates, and also building a reporting generator for traceability purposes. Finally, we'll look at database, how to build a database of measurements, pooling measurements, and how to mine that database, and how to share data and templates once you're up and running. All right, so looking at a reproducibility test. What we've done is taken a look at the FDA requirement, the Title 21, the J21J as it's called, for radiographic equipment. It's the simplest one, that's why I chose it, and it's a simple one to compare it as well. So reproducibility. What we're looking for is a coefficient of variation that should be no greater than 0.05. That's then 5%. How do we do that? Well, it's determined by the collection of data from 10 consecutive measurements. It says here taken within a time period of 1 hour, and it should also be cold and stuff like that. But we'll make it simple. We'll make 10 exposures and see how that works for us. And if we look at a typical procedure in today, what happens is that, well, you'll place an instrument in the X-ray beam. You'll prepare for the visual reading of the values. You'll make an exposure, write down the measurement value, and then make another exposure until you've got them all, and then calculate the data for pass and fail results. So let's see how that works out for us. First of all, the traditional method. So we've set everything up, we've got the instrument and the beam. We have now using Ocean Quick Check for a display software to collect the data for us for each exposure. So exposure number 1, it gives us a lot of data. We've got the tube voltage, the kV, time. There we go. There's the exposure. So 34.25. Then we've got some other information here as well. Dose rate, HVL, and total filtration. But exposure is the interesting value. So we'll write that down and we'll make exposure number 2. Now it's easier to find the dose there. It's 34.22. We'll write that down as well, and we keep on going until we'll fast forward now until exposure number 9, just to save some time. So make a note, 37.88, and then last one, exposure number 10, is 34.64. Okay, good. Now we've collected all the 10 values. Now what do we do? Well, we need to go back, figure out, okay, to determine reproducibility, pass or fail. This is the formula. The coefficient of variation is, okay, it's the estimated standard deviation of the population divided by the mean value. Okay, so let's start and get the mean value. Then we get the sum. We calculate the mean value. We got 35.45. Now, all right, standard deviation. How is that done? Okay, this is the formula when we look it up. Okay, well, I'm cheating a little bit. I'm using Excel for those calculations and setting it up as those values. We've got the mean value. Here is a difference from mean and the square difference from mean, which is, here we go. This is each value, the difference to mean, and square that and sum it up. We've got 19.36 divided by n minus 1 is 9. That gives us then, when we take the square root out of it, it's 1.47. All right, so we've got the standard deviation, 1.47. The mean, we have that from before, that's 35.45. All right, that gives us the COV, the coefficient of variation, to 0.041. So it's 4.1%. So it's less than 0.05 at least. That is then a pass. So that's fine. And finally, we arrived doing it in the manual way, cheating a little bit with Excel, but that's fine. What are then the efficiency impacts of doing this way? Well, first of all, we have the time that we need to take into account, the time it takes to write all the values by hand. Second, of course, manual calculations. That also takes quite a while. Then, not to be ignored, a risk of transcription error. Because if we look here, is this 31.05 or is it 37.05? Not very big difference maybe, but it could be a difference between pass and fail. Is this 34.64 or 39.64? That's also not very big difference maybe, but it could be the reason behind failing a pass or passing a fail. So there are efficiency impacts that we need to take into account. Is there an improvement to be made? Well, there is, of course. We have the possibility to export the data to Excel and do the calculations there. Why not? In that case, what we would do is, since we have the possibility here to switch to a grid view where we have all the data, we can export that data to Excel and in Excel utilize a formula, the one that we saw before, to calculate the same values. What we're doing here then is just linking the data, copying the data from the dose values into the proper place in the formula, line by line and row by row. And thereby we can calculate the coefficient of variation a little quicker, at least. There is then another improvement, as I promised, using an ocean template. And how would that look? Well, here we would be using an existing template from the library. You see here is a tab called the library, and we can pull up that template, which is for exposure reproducibility. When this field here, the ready signal is on, we're good to go. And we can ensure that, yeah, we've got the exposure reproducibility, and that's what we're doing. So we're good to go with the first exposure. We see the data landing in the grid mode line by line. There's no need, of course, to write any figures down because the table populates itself automatically, line by row, exposure by exposure. So, and as you can see, the analysis portion, which is down here, starts working as soon as it has enough data to work with. And again, if we're just doing the same thing, we do fast forward to exposure number 9, and we see here that at exposure number 10, we've got all the data. We see from the analysis portion that we have a coefficient of variation which is 3.4%, which is good. I mean, it says here limit is 10, but we need to fine tune that one. We've got a mean value calculation as well. Standard deviation from mean is there as well, maximum. So we've got some extra information here apart from that. But we've got a pass for because 3.4% is below the limit. Now, how did that work? Well, we've got the pass-fail criteria or pass-fail message immediately. So we don't have to do any calculations, and there's no need to do any export anywhere. We have the data available, whereby we can generate a report quickly as well. By finding the preview report window, we can get a report where the data collected is presented along with reporting of the analysis. So the analysis is an exposure reproducibility, it's passed because we have those data. Here is the plot of the different exposures of the exposures as different from mean. We also in the report also for traceability have the serial number of the instrument used. So that's all there as soon as we have the final and the last exposure. The data, the analysis, and also the test equipment used and serial number for traceability. So let's have a look at the analysis. How does that work? Well, by going in here and looking at it, we can choose modify the exposure reproducibility analysis. And we see here that we have a number of values or a number of limits to select. And we can pick and choose which ones we would like to monitor. And in this case, the maximum deviation from mean plus minus 5% if it's a requirement. If not, uncheck the box. Maximum coefficient of variation should be 5%. Tick that box, and it's included there. Of course, we can select more or less as we choose how many of these tests we want to make, how many of these limits we want to test for. But this is the location and the selections we can make in when it comes to setting the analysis limits in the analysis. And just to be on the safe side, explain a little bit and what we have. It might be a mystery how that works. Well, if we go in and look at the help portion of Ocean, we have an explanation on how the calculations are done for reproducibility analyses. So first of all, we've got the mean value. This is the explanation, typical mathematics, no problems there. Difference from mean, as again described. Coefficient of variation is also, as we've seen in the other, it's a standard deviation divided by the mean value. And the standard deviation, well, it's here. And if we decipher this one, it's the same as we had in the formula we saw before from Wikipedia. For all analyses, we have this presentation of the calculations, how the calculations are made, so that we can verify that it's the proper way of making the calculation. All right, we've got, that was one analysis. Is there a way, can we combine analyses? Well, we can. And if we do, we can arrive at something like this. It's a template where we have 8 different tests or analyses in one template. We've got 2 for mass accuracy, 1 for shorter exposure times and 1 for a little bit longer exposure times. And they are then divided up here, lines 1 and 2, and 3 and 4 respectively. Similarly, for KVP accuracy, we've got differences. 1 for line 5 to 7, and another range for 8 to 10, 3 exposures each, where we have shorter exposure times and a bit longer exposure times. Reproducibility is there as well. Mass linearity ranges over 20 exposures. The reproducibility is divided up into into 2 mass settings with 10 exposures each. So we can look at that. Half value layer is also included as a one-shot exposure. So how does that work then? Well, if you remember, we had the first lines 1 and 2, that was for mass accuracy for short MAs. And as you see, we have for that one, for these 2, we have a limit, pass-fail limit of plus minus 20% for these ones. Mass accuracy on shorter exposures than 15 milliseconds. And that's these 2 lines. You see, we have mass values here, 2.5 mass and 1.6 mass. That's the set value for the mass that we set up in as a technique for the mobile X-ray unit. There are the limits. If we look at the slightly longer exposure times, which are longer than 15 milliseconds, that's these 2 lines. So for these 2 lines, we have a different analysis, and for those, the limits are plus minus 5% for larger than 15 milliseconds. So similarly, we can do that. We have a set value and a measured value for HVL. It's a bit of a special test procedure. We don't have any set HVL value as such. So how is that done? Well, in that case, we find a line. In this case, it's row number 12, and pick that one since it's 80 kV, and that's the kV setting at which we are to perform the HVL testing. On this side, we can see that we've selected not a set value, but a table, a reference table. This one is for FDA, generated by FDA, for X-ray machines manufactured on or after June 10th in 2006. So it's a typical beam quality test. And it's a one-shot HVL. That means that we'll measure the HVL in one shot, compare it to the minimum HVL values that we have in this table from FDA. And by that, we can determine if it's pass or fail. These are the minimum values. That means that the measured HVL should be higher than this. So we have a table like this. It's also then generated automatically by Ocean software as a graph, which we can interpret and find out what we're looking at. The benefit here of doing this as a one-shot HVL measurement is that we'll measure at the actual kV level, since the HVL is of course dependent on the kV. So if we look here at especially around 70 or 50 kV, but even between 80 and 82 kV, there's a slight difference in HVL. So there's might be a big difference at what actual kV we're measuring the HVL. If we take the traditional method, we actually don't know what the kV value are, so we're unsure if we only rely on aluminum. But this takes also variations in kV into account, and we get a very precise measurement of the HVL. So this is what it does. This is one table. Of course, there's a corresponding one for manufacture dates before June 10, 2006. There's also other ones for mammography, etc. Whole selection. This is also selectable, user selectable, so we can make our own table if we so desire. But here's just to explain that with HVL, there is no set value as such in the template. All right, so here we see what's going on and what it looks like. We have the template, and we see the first 16 rows. We have the set values as per the HHS testing documents that are required. And if we just look at and see what would it look like in real life when we're collecting data. I've made a small video, as you can see. We're getting the data. I've speeded up a little bit just for simplicity's sake. We'll see that we get dynamically pass-fail criteria already here in the grid. It's feeding back the information that we're getting from the analyses, which is down on this portion right here. So we have mostly passes. That's encouraging. We're now approaching the HVL test, and there we see it's 3.04, which is a pass, of course, for the half value layer. Now we've done 10 exposures for the reproducibility of the first one, and now when we've done the 10 last ones, the reproducibility for 40 mass is also a pass. And we have all the analysis graphs that we can see. We see here there is a fail. The fail is at the first exposure. For the mass exposure, for the longer exposure times, it looks good. We've got a pass for that one. KVP accuracy also pass, although you see here the results are a little bit jittery. At the longer exposure, it looks a little bit better around the mean, more assembled around the mean line. Linearity is also very nice. Reproducibility looks really solid. No real differences in there. And for this one as well, for the 40 mass looks nice. The pass value for the HVL is there as well. But this one, the fail for the first one is a bit of a disappointment. So let's try and give it a go again. We'll just repeat that exposure and see how that, if we can get a pass on everything else here. So here we go. It gets in there, and yes, thank you. That was nice. The difference there was then now 6.8%. So it's within the plus minus 20% limit that we had, and we are now passing. The report, since that is done, that was the last exposure, everything is done. We've got the analysis, we've got pass-fail, we know that it is. On top of that, we also have the report ready with all the measurements that we've collected, a summary of the complete testing that we've done, and also whatever other documentation that we determine necessary for traceability and for the customer or for our own records to keep. And that was one template that we can combine in this way. If we look at Ocean Sessions, that's another way of taking this efficiency to yet another level. With Ocean Sessions, we can combine templates in a smart way so that we collect data in very productive manner. We can then combine more tests without causing so much clutter. So here we add a number of templates into one session. We've got the one that we saw just now, which is HHS mass accuracy, etc. test. We have another one on the second tab, which is a collimator light intensity test, and a third one, which is a light field alignment test. So these are then typical tests that you do at the same time to get your HHS documents in order. So in this case, we can combine these different tests into a session. So we saw here that we had the test for the KVP and mass accuracy. The second one is the one for the collimated light intensity test. This requires us to connect the light meter to the instrument and then measure the light in the 4 quadrants of the collimator light field. We need to average that out, compare that to ambient light, and according to the regulations, it should be a minimum of 160 lux difference. And in this case, it passes. And the analysis we're doing right here in this part is just simply a minimum maximum test to find that we are actually passing this limit, the legal limit. For the field alignment test, well, what we're doing is measuring the light field, the X-ray field, the size of them, calculating error, and then calculating the error and how that relates to the source distance, SID, and it's the minimum, the maximum is 1.8%, and that's the legal limit. So for this application, it passes. Now this data is then entered manually because we don't have any instrument like that at this time. So these measurements are entered manually into this with a keyboard to get those data. The computation is done automatically with templates. And again, as before, we have a customizable template with all these different tests. And as you remember from before, here, we've got the first one up until here. This is the ones that we had for the HHS test, the mass and KV accuracy test that we saw before. Then we've got the collimator light test and the beam alignment test. So we get all of these from the latest session. And of course, we can then pick and choose if we want what information we want to keep. So that's one way of generating the information and collecting information. And storing measurements is also quite interesting and quite important when you're looking at traceability. And within Ocean, there is a possibility to build a database so that when we're using a template, we can choose from the database which site. In this case, is it the John F. Kennedy Hospital, or is it RTI Electronics Clinic, or the Turnbull Clinic, or where these clinics all have departments, and every department has a number of rooms and etc. So we can build a database with that kind of structure. We then associate the measurement with that room, and that means that the room will have the session will inherit the data from that room. That means what serial number of the equipment, what kind of tube is it, what kind of generator is it, what serial number is it, etc. and what site does it belong to. So that information is then imported from the database here as you associate, merges it when you associate a session that way. Okay, so and what does that help us with? Well, for one, we have a record of where we've made our tests and where we collected the data from. There's also a possibility then to mine that data, looking at trends, for instance, which is quite complicated when you're looking at Excel data, if you collect it that way. But here we can select a trend. We can, from that trend, decide what value do we want to analyze, what do we want to check, what do we want to see trend. Well, let's just for simplicity's sake look at accuracy. What kind of accuracy? Well, kV, that means tube voltage. Any specific modality? No, we'll look at them all and just see out of curiosity. So that query is sent to the database, and back is sent a plot like this with, here are the results of kVp accuracy tests performed at sites within our database. All right, and that gives us a picture. Do we have any outliers? Do we have anything that needs to be to pay attention? Is there a trend we can see over time? See if we can do this. My database is not very full at this moment, but if in real life you may have look for data for a certain manufacturer or a certain generator to see, is there a deterioration of the kVp accuracy over time for a certain manufacturer or a certain tube? This is how easy you can access that kind of information to monitor the performance of your installed base. So when you go here, you can then click and see where was this made? Where was this individual dot made? We look at that one. We can then right click and pull up a quick view of the actual measurement and waveforms to see what actually was going on at that measurement. Of course, this kind of information can also be shared between colleagues quite easily. We can share sites, including all the information about the rooms and the serial numbers and the measurements, or individual measurements or individual templates. We can simply share to and send to anybody else who's running an Ocean software, thereby minimizing the total workload in getting and producing Ocean templates. All right, I'll just stop there a little bit and make a bit of a summary. When we look at the Ocean templates, what does that bring us? Well, it reduces the time that normally is used for manual data entry. Since we get the data directly, it eliminates the risk of typing errors in data transfer. And also, once you get the hang of it, the design of templates is quite easy, especially if you start building up a database of individual test templates that you then can combine into sessions. Ocean is specifically designed for X-ray QA, meaning that the formulas used are tailored for that, so that you don't have to worry too much about the mathematical formulae. You need to worry about the limits that go in, that should be going in, and that's the extent of it. It's easy to customize the analyses for typical industry, if it's accuracy, or if it's kV accuracy, timer accuracy, or mass accuracy, as we saw in one of these templates. If it's reproducibility of time, kV, dose, MA, linearity, also quite interesting in many cases. CTDI, we haven't touched that. That's a very interesting subject where we can build templates automatically so that you make 5 exposures and you've got your CTDI measurement directly instead of having to do all the calculations. HVL is one shot, or you can use the traditional method as well, and using a template for the calculations on it. Customizable reports, you can change the language in them, or you can decide in which order the data is presented. For instance, that's selectable. We have data storage in a mineable database, so we can actually retrieve and do something with the data quite easily. And we can pool that data as well with others if we have the same, if we want to share database. And all of this contributes to the reduction of quality assurance downtime, anytime related to that. It is quicker. We have from the market, we have customers cutting the time for an X-ray QA of one X-ray room, a RAD room, from 2 hours down to 20 minutes. I didn't believe it myself, but when she explained how that was done, it made quite a lot of sense. Instead of using a number of different instruments and the manual calculation, she managed to do it in a session template, using making smart use of the hardware and also of the Ocean template design. So there is a potential for time saving and efficiency improvement by using Ocean templates, at least in our opinion. If you would like to know more, please contact us. Until then, I'd like to thank you for your attention. My name is Erik Wikström, and here is my contact email address. Feel free to contact me anytime. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Erik. That was a great presentation, and I'd like to start now with a few questions that have come through during your presentation. A reminder to our audience, if you do have any questions, please use the question feature on your webinar dashboard. Our first question is, do you have to use these kind of templates to make measurements with RTI instruments?
Well, no, not as advanced. No, as we saw during the manual portion, doing it manually and writing it down, you saw you had a display that just displayed the value, the measured values. That is not a template. That's just a simple display, and that comes with all instruments from RTI. So, and that doesn't require any programming or designing of templates at all.
Great, thank you so much. Our next question is, are there ways to export data from templates to Excel, for example?
Yes. You saw also again in the beginning there was we made a quick export to Excel, and we get that question quite a lot. So I've actually done a bit of a cheat sheet for the ways of exporting Excel. And if we had our template here, the one we looked at before, there is a tab called Data Link, where we can actually then select Send Data or Send Session. So that means that we can send the data in the grid here just as it is to an Excel spreadsheet. Or we can send the complete session, all data from this test, the collimated light test, and this test as well into an Excel spreadsheet. There's also a possibility to embed Excel into a template like this to have the best of both worlds, which is then both Ocean template and data presentation and Excel. So the possibility to collect data, mineable data, and also then you continue to use Excel as you've done before.
Thank you so much. Our next question is, can Ocean templates be shared, or do users have to build their own templates?
No, well, like I said, it is possible to share templates quite easily. There's what we call like a magic gesture in Ocean, which is right-click, and when you're in a view, in this view, if you will be right-clicking on one of these lines or items here, a selection of actions would come up, and one of them would be export, so that you can actually export measurements, or you can export templates, you can export sites. So any part of the database can be exported and shared with those who are using Ocean, other colleagues who are using Ocean, for instance. Yes.
Thank you so much, Erik, for a wonderful presentation. I'd like to encourage everyone to visit today's sponsor to learn more about the products they provide to our industry. Visit rtigroup.com. A quick reminder that you can obtain your continuing education certificate by completing the post-webinar survey. The survey will be emailed 1 hour after the completion of today's webinar. You must complete the survey to receive your 1 CE credit from the ACI, and you will be able to download the certificate directly from your computer once the survey is submitted. If you have any questions, you can reach us at webinar@mdpublishing.com. We will be back next week with another webinar. Visit webinarwednesday.live for more details and complimentary registration.